Good evening, everybody. Hopefully everybody can see us in the virtual outer space. It's Mike Suleiman here with South Jersey Forward. Really appreciate everybody spending an evening with us, either live or after the fact on a recording for our first inaugural roundtable. So we are a new nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank and advocacy organization. And, we really want to strive for some bold ideas and fresh perspectives and solutions for folks south of 195. We're not concerned about milquetoast ideas or boilerplate topics. We want to dive into meaty policy and actually come up with real solutions. So I'm really excited. Our first topic tonight is going to be about trying to induce owner-occupied and middle-class housing in the city of Atlantic City. And certainly the things that we can do in Atlantic City aren't just for Atlantic City. The extent to which we can replicate those things in Pleasantville or Camden or Vineland or Millville or Bridgeton or other urban areas, Salem City, is incredibly important. So really appreciate everybody joining on. I want to introduce our two panelists tonight. First off is Stephanie Marshall. Stephanie is a councilwoman in the great city of Atlantic City. She's also the chairwoman of the Atlantic City Housing Authority. So she's going to talk to us about some of the efforts at the Atlantic City Housing Authority. And then we have Pastor Alexander Smith from Community Harvest Church right there on New York Avenue in Atlantic City to talk to us about a tiny homes initiative that, we're looking to see going in the city of Atlantic City, how those tiny homes can be a opportunity by which folks can become renters to owners, build up equity and things like that. But certainly wanted to start with some introductory comments. I think what kind of prompted me to kind of focus on this topic is there's been a lot of discussion and debate about what to do with Bader Field. Couple of competing projects. There's always been ideas about what kind of housing to do there, what it would look like, how to build up that neighborhood. And it got me thinking that really in Atlantic City, we've got to grow the population and we've got to bring middle-class families back, because oftentimes you look at the median income of Atlantic County, which is much lower than the state, frankly. You have a lot of folks who, frankly, make too much to qualify for public subsidized housing, but certainly can't afford any luxury units. So where's that sweet spot in the middle? And it's not just bringing folks into Atlantic City, which we have to bring middle-class families back there, but lifting folks in Atlantic City out of poverty and get them from renters to owners. 75% of Atlantic City residents are renters. And that's, it's not uncommon with urban areas, but it's not sustainable. I think Councilwoman Marshall and her constituents would love to get folks owning, building equity, especially in historically disadvantaged communities, to build that wealth and equity. One of the things I proposed was a half a penny increase on casino taxes for 4 years to create housing incubator zones, kind of like what you see in Philadelphia, where you have tax abatements to encourage home ownership, incentives to folks to modernize or remodel or refurbish their homes, certainly down payment assistance, things of that nature, and have a revenue stream to fund that. I think is important, because it's not just about the tourism district. I may get in trouble with our panelists here, but everybody focuses on the tourism district, and I think for decades that has failed Atlantic City. We got to build up vibrancy in Venice Park and Chelsea Heights, and even back Maryland, which frankly for decades folks have just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, it's a bad part of town. Well, we shouldn't just accept that as it being a bad part of town. We need to induce home ownership there and focus outside of the tourism district. When Christie created the tourism district in the Democratic legislature, it just seemed like that was the focus, and the other neighborhoods forget about it. So I think really a holistic approach to all the neighborhoods in Atlantic City, because even if they're not touristy areas, you have to build up these neighborhoods, lift folks out of poverty, and create communities again. I think our panelists would agree on that, creating the sense of community. So with that, I want to kick it off to Councilwoman Marshall and Chairwoman Marshall. For Luddites like me, tell us about the Atlantic City Housing Authority. What is the Atlantic City Housing Authority? What work do they do? What's your role as chairwoman? And walk us through how your mission of helping folks find quality housing is furthering Atlantic City.
All right. Good evening, Mike, and thank you for having me and your listening audience out there. The Atlantic City Housing Authority is a federally funded program. It's under HUD, and the funding is from the federal government. And so we have about 1,100 units in Atlantic City, 7 different properties. And we consist of public housing, which is family homes. We also have senior buildings, and we also have another component called scattered sites, and we have a Section 8 department. There are about 80 80 housing authorities in the state of New Jersey, And most of those housing authorities have pretty much some of the same. Some housing authorities in the state have just the Section 8 department, but others pretty much have the family sites as well as senior sites. And I should say senior and disabled right now, because the federal government changed policies several years ago, which allows disabled residents to also live with the seniors in some of those high rise buildings. We have a property in Atlantic City that is Stanley Home Village. Stanley Home Village was the first public housing in the country, built in 1935, and it was built in three different phases up until 1955. Stanley Home Village was built. So you can imagine, the infrastructure and the other issues that, may occur there with piping and so forth. We are in the process of developing new housing soon. Well, I want to go back a couple years ago, about 10 years ago, the federal government came up with a program called Hope 6. And it initially started out with mixed housing. So you had renters there as well as some home owners. And what they did with that program is the federal government will cover half of the market rate of that unit, as well as other homes in Atlantic City, or I should say, really the country, because it's a federal program. And if there was a home that was, let's just say, $100,000, the program under HUD would pay 50,000, and then the homeowner would finance what would mortgage the remaining 50,000. And it was a stipulation that you had to remain in a home for 10 years. And so a lot of those resources dried up over the years. I don't think the Hope 6 program uh, it worked as well as the federal government thought it would work. And so now we're looking to other avenues to try to get people into home ownership. And the best way to do that is to purchase homes in the open market and then selling them to some of our residents at 50% off. One of outside of the Hope 6 program, we have what's called scattered sites. So throughout Atlantic City, there are about 150 scattered sites, and it could be 4 here, maybe, 4 on this street, 6 on the next street, and they typically blend into neighborhoods. So most people, and the purpose of that was get out of the stigma of public housing and to have these homes blend in, these scattered sites blend in with other homes in other neighborhoods. And we are looking to possibly get out of that as well and sell those units to possibly some of the residents that are there, or some of the families that we have in some of our family homes into those, because the federal government again realized that that was costly. And so I often tell people, we're a federal program, okay, under HUD, a federal agency, and we just happen to be doing business in the city of Atlantic City or in the state of New Jersey. And so all the reporting happens strictly with HUD, and we report to HUD and we go to HUD for everything, and not too much of the city. The city doesn't do any inspections. Cities are not involved. The state, for the most part, are not even involved in any operations with the housing authorities in the state of New Jersey. So that's a little bit about the housing. We do have some outdated housing in which we hope in the near future we could definitely rebuild. In 2021, City Council passed a resolution giving us redevelopment rights for an entire city block. So in the next couple of years, we're definitely looking to rebuild there. And we hope to move some of our residents from Stanley Home Village into that new property and to begin to tear down Stanley Home Village. We have another family site called Busby Village that's on the further into town, headed toward Vintner. in which we were able to redevelop that property. So we're moving, and a lot of the residents wanted to keep their same address. So we're moving a lot of the residents out of their unit into another unit and allowing them to come back. Busby structurally was okay to just redevelop. And when they redevelop, I mean, they literally going in, knocking out some walls and so forth, changing up front and the back porches, putting in washer and dryers and so forth. We received a $16 million grant to do that under HUD that we applied for, and some other fundings. And so that should be wrapping up in the next month or two. So that's a little bit about the Atlantic City Housing Authority, and frankly about public housing throughout the country.
Well, that's excellent. I before this conversation, Stephanie, I knew about like 5%. So I went from 5 to a lot more. So that's very fascinating stuff, and certainly want to dive into that more, especially with the scattered, what was that thing called
Scattered sites.
scattered sites. I think that's a fascinating concept, and I'd like to dive more into that. So I want to kick it over to Pastor Smith. And so for everybody's context, Pastor Smith and I met a couple weeks ago or last month at a faith breakfast that Councilman Kaleem Shabazz hosted. And he talked publicly about this concept about tiny homes. And I pulled him aside and said, hey, what's this thing about tiny homes? It sounds like an interesting idea. And we got talking. I said, hey, you want to come on a roundtable? And he graciously agreed. So Pastor Smith, the floor is yours. Certainly introduce yourself and everybody about, certainly your work and efforts, and talk to us about tiny homes. What is that? What's the concept, and how could that be a benefit to folks in Atlantic City?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll open up by saying thank you for having me, Michael, and saying hi to Miss Marshall. I don't know if you recognize my face, but I certainly recognize yours. I'm born and raised here in Atlantic City. I'm a pastor here. I work for the city also. And my mother is a product of the Hope 6 program. I grew up in the Maryland Avenue courts. They were called the courts. My mom, she went through the Hope 6 program, and she was able to acquire a home through that program. So I don't know how everyone else who took advantage of the program made out, but my mom, she made out very well, and she is currently still residing in the home that she was able to purchase through that Hope 6 program. But moving along in regards to the tiny houses, like tiny houses throughout the country have been on the rise, to create affordable housing opportunities for people who can afford a house, to buy a house at the average price of what a house would cost on today, which I could argue to say is really not affordable for most people. But our story is I think back in 2015 or 16, the city of Atlantic City, they passed an ordinance to allow people to actually build tiny houses. If you don't know, a tiny house is usually, the standard for a tiny house is between 300 to 600 square foot. And that actually varies depending on where you're at in the country, because I've seen tiny houses as small as 100 square feet, but the average is between 300 to 500 square feet. The ordinance that the city of Atlantic City passed back in 15 was to build units that were a maximum of 300 square foot. They actually passed that ordinance because they did it in anticipation for something called the New Jersey Tiny House Pilot Program. There was as a matter of fact, it's still in the pipeline as far as I know, but there was a tiny house pilot program that was supposed to be implemented throughout the state. I think there was supposed to be a pot of $5 million, and that money was supposed to be divided into 3 or 4 municipalities, with Atlantic City being one of those municipalities. So in anticipation for that, the council passed the ordinance that if you were the owner of lots and you wanted to develop them into tiny homes, you had the opportunity to do so. So my church, some years ago, we started a community development corporation called Seeds of Hope. And under the umbrella of Seeds of Hope, we were able to acquire multiple vacant, undersized lots at the city auction. And when we found out that the city passed this ordinance, we decided that we would take the steps necessary to build and to develop tiny houses on these lots. So I believe in 2000, I can't remember what year Hurricane Sandy broke out, 2011 or 12, but there was a house behind our church that was vacant. It was destroyed by the storm. So we took the steps to acquire the property. In the process of acquiring it, of course, we took the efforts to develop the property. But what happened was the property had an accident. A car actually ran into the property. We had to tear the house down. But in the meantime, what we did was we sought out funding from the Sandy Recovery Program. And we were able to get a small grant. And with that small grant, we partnered with a company called Ocean Inc. At the time, a gentleman named Ted Gooding was the president of Ocean Inc. We were connected with Mr. Gooding. He was doing tiny houses, I believe, in Ocean County. He had done a few tiny houses in Ocean County. When we met with him, he explained to us that if we were able to get the grant money through the Sandy Recovery Program, that he could help us to build, to redevelop the house that we tore down into a tiny house. And we were able to get the funding, and with the assistance of Ocean Inc., we actually rebuilt, and we built a 384 square foot tiny house that we currently the church owns it. It has it's central air. It's a nice small property for a single person or someone who has a very small family, maybe 2 people. Moving forward, after we built the house through the Sandy Recovery, we took the steps further to get approvals to build additional tiny homes on some of the vacant lots that we owned. We were able to get plans drawn up. We presented everything to the city of Atlantic City. It was approved for us to actually build 5 tiny houses on some of the lots that we owned over by the Atlantic City PAL. So after we got the approvals, we were seeking for funding to help us to develop the project. We were at the table with the state of New Jersey, Department of Community Affairs, and we also were at the table with CRDA. To make a long story short, they liked the idea. They were supportive of it. We were looking forward to getting the funding from them, but COVID-19 broke out. And when COVID-19 broke out, that put everything on halt. When things started to pick back up, we reached back out to CRDA, and the funding that they were quote unquote were going to help us with to develop the project, that stuff was now being funneled towards COVID-19 initiatives. So since that, we haven't been able to really get any more traction in terms of completing this project, because we have put a lot of money and time and effort into the project. But right now, We're at a standstill. Part of the standstill is this also, is that during the process of the COVID pushback and delaying everything, our plans expired. And so far we haven't gotten an extension to continue the plans. So that's kind of where we're at with our tiny house initiative at Atlantic City.
Well, again, very fascinating stuff. And I neglected to mention earlier that the goal is to, in addition to our research, take some of the comments and ideas from this roundtable and put that in a report, which I hope we can issue soon, because I think we've got a lot. This is not a one size fits all, nor this is one thing solves the problem. I think it's a holistic approach that we need to take. And certainly, folks watching, I'm getting some text very positive. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, either on Facebook or Twitter. I'd love to hear everybody's comments. And I do want to continue the conversation. We do have a couple questions that came in. One of them, presumably for Councilwoman Marshall, Jackie asked, what is the plan for Stanley Homes after residents are relocated? Only the easy questions, right, Stephanie?
Yeah, so the plan for Stanley Home Village is to move those residents out. Everything with Stanley is custom. The doors are custom, the refrigerators, the windows, everything. So, as we all know, anything custom is going to cost, extra money to pay for. And so with that, and a lot of the underground issues is one of the reasons why Stanley just needs to be torn down at this point. So hopefully soon in the next year, we could begin development on the city block that we have and begin to move those residents out. Something that we decided with the housing authority is that we were not going to fill any more of the units. So once families move out, we're going to begin to start taking those units offline, because of the density at Stanley is not consistent with HUD regulations now. And so Stanley has 420 units. Those 420 units with the city lot will go down to about 150 when we were looking at some of the plans. And so after that, as you know, Stanley Home Village is on 3 different city blocks. And so we're going to start working on, we're going to tear down the third lot, which is furthest from the boilers. The boilers are all at the first Stanley Home Village, I should say, the one that was built in 1935. So that heat and hot water goes underground through the street all the way to the third village. So we're going to begin to tear that one down, rebuild there, move over to the second, and then finally move over to the oldest one, which is in the first village. And so the block will remain housing authority property, and that would allow us to rebuild. And it will definitely be a family site again, and we'll probably mix it with some of the seniors and disabled as well.
That's a good insight. And to your point, it just I've always felt, and I will make, sorry, Alexa's talking to me. The troubles of Zooming from home, right? I've always felt, and this is my opinion, not asking anybody to agree or disagree, but oftentimes in cities, even Atlantic City, it just seems like there's not a mix of the different classes kind of living together, mixed use. It's, let's put all the affordable housing, and some folks would degradingly say, poor folks in one area, and let's have these luxury units and the rich folks in another area, and kind of being segregated socioeconomically, which I think is not good. So to your point, Stephanie, in terms of that you can mix folks up and have a blending. We're all humans. We all put our pants on one leg at a time. So the extent to which we can induce that is important. Pastor, question from you from Harvey asked, and I think you touch on this, but just to make sure, how many tiny houses do you plan to build? I know you said there was a pilot plan for a few, but how many are you looking at for
as many as we can.
There you go.
But we were approved to build 5. I think we currently have possession of 13 lots. So, if I go off the of what we have possession of, that's 13, but as many as we can. I think it's a good option for affordable housing to low to moderate income individuals and very small families. That was our target, but it's the tiny house opportunity is a seed to people actually being able to step into the middle class. It's like a starter seed to build some equity, and then later on, as their family grow, they can sell that and move to something more sustainable for the size of their families.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the things that I think it's unfortunate, no fault to anybody here. One of the issues we're running into now is the price of the interest rates going up. I mean, I bought my home a couple of years ago and the interest rate was 2.5. Now interest rate's what, 6, 7. So, certainly that does put a burn. That's yet another barrier for folks to home ownership anywhere in the state, let alone Atlantic City, where frankly, folks are already behind the 8 ball. I know in the chat here, and I agree with Harvey. Harvey likes your idea of tiny homes, Pastor. He thinks it's a good start. And yeah, to your point, I mean, if it's folks that even if it's a couple, even as somebody like me who's a single guy and, you don't need a whole lot of space and you want to build equity, and then the hope is you'll sell it, buy something else, and somebody else follows you along and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with this, Stephanie, but and I'm not as familiar as I should be. Jackie in the chat mentions the idea of rent to own or lease to own. Do you have any familiarity with that? I get the concept, but.
Mm-hmm. So under the housing authorities, there's a Department of Resident Services. And one of the programs that we had some years ago, residents were, when they paid their rent, a portion of their rent would go into an account for a savings. And so to allow those residents to qualify, it will go toward a down payment. And so that was a program. HUD tries these programs, over the years. And if they work, they keep them. If they don't, they may try to move on to a different program. We haven't had that program in about 10 years. But here in Atlantic City, it was a successful program. We had a lot of residents who were able to save, quite a few $1,000s. And they were able to have that assist, and then we would match that assistance, that savings with assistance for a down payment for a home. So quite a few people did go through that program and were able to purchase home.
Yeah, and certainly go back to the chat in a second, but I guess it's just a general question, and I don't know if there's any one answer, right answer, whatever. But, why do you think historically Atlantic City's had a problem? And I have theories. Why do you think Atlantic City's had a problem with, having an imbalance of renters versus owners? That's a question for anybody. Not an easy one, I know. But,
yeah. I wonder if having Atlantic City being a tourism town has played a large part. I know a lot of people who would come to Atlantic City to visit. Some would stay and some would leave. Some would come and work in the summer. I know quite a few people who would come, and work in the summer. They had relatives here and then they will go back home. And so I wonder if that may have played a part in not having many homeowners here in Atlantic City. It became a rental town with not having long-term owners here, year round.
Yeah, to your point, certainly the pastor wants to weigh in, feel free. I think it's a holistic thing. I mean, housing in and of itself is important. That's the purpose of tonight's discussion, but it's also just clean and safe. And certainly, I think our friend Chief Sargis would argue that the police department's horribly understaffed. And frankly, the state's got to chip in and make that the case, but also, I think even though I think it's a subconscious issue, the fact of a lack of supermarket and the city being a food desert is an issue. It's not as easy for folks to, if they don't have reliable transportation, to get to ShopRite in Absecon or get to the Acme in Ventnor. Certainly they can go to Renaissance Plaza, but if they want good quality stuff, it's difficult for folks. And if you're, you have a husband or wife, and you have a couple of kids, and you could live in Ventnor just as easily as you could live in Atlantic City, and you're closer to all those things, it plays a factor. And I think certainly, I know the state's out to RFP again for a supermarket. I certainly hope that's the case. I know one of the things that's been proposed and talked about with the governor's office is the idea of a supermarket at the first floor and housing above it, which is a very interesting concept. I know certainly there's been there's a hope to get ShopRite the brand, and I respect that. But frankly, if you get some sort of good supermarket chain or brand, whether it's ShopRite or not, I don't know if that necessarily needs to be the case. If you put a Trader Joe's in Atlantic City, I swear to God, the city will be on fire, because that place is so darn popular, and we don't have one on this side of South Jersey. So I think there's a lot of interesting things. There's other things that factor in this housing, but I think you're right, Stephanie, about that kind of a systemic problem.
Can I say something, Michael?
No, please, Pastor. Absolutely.
Just what came to my mind is the quote unquote stigma. Like I mentioned, I'm born and raised here. I work here. I'm a pastor here, but all of my life I've heard quite often people who don't live in Atlantic City talk negatively about Atlantic City, and a lot of times people, instead of them doing their research, they just go with what they hear or what they see in the newspaper. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that Atlantic City is perfect. Atlantic City has its issues, but in regards to my evaluation of Atlantic City, I think Atlantic City is a great place to live. I think it's a good place to raise a family. Like, I've raised my children. I have 3 children. I raised my 3 children here in Atlantic City. My mom, I had 3 sisters. It was 4 of us, and we were raised in the city of Atlantic City. We went through the Atlantic City public school system. All of us have made out in life, I would say, pretty well. But I think that the reason, or one of the reasons that you don't see a lot of home ownership in Atlantic City is based upon that stigma that Atlantic City is not a good place, is not safe to be here, which I disagree with.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance, right? I mean, to your point, Pass, you have to, when you see stuff that's not good, you have to call it out and be honest. But at the same time, you can still be a cheerleader. They're not mutually exclusive, right? I mean, some of the best restaurants in the area are in Atlantic City. At the same time, we certainly have neighborhoods that are in need of help, like Backmaran, like other parts of town where it's not as clean and safe as it should be, or it's perceived to be. Right. Certainly the boardwalk, and we had the fire on the boardwalk last month, and we had some homeless folks living under the boardwalk, which is terrible. And that systemic problem of how do we get those folks into a tiny home? I think that would be a perfect avenue. Help them build equity if they're suffering from alcoholism or addiction or things of that nature. So, it's kind of a holistic approach. I got a question here from Nick, who actually texted me, since everybody's got my number. And it's good with Nick's a friend. He's a young guy. He's 24. He's going to school. How can you make Atlantic City more accessible to young people, especially thinking about those who do not have an extensive credit history, often required when looking for a place to live? And, I don't know if some of these, less, more affordable, I hate to use that word because it gets people triggered, the more affordable housing units could help younger folks who are looking to build up credit. And, I know we got the Bry project at Delaware and Atlantic, and that's a market rate rental place. But, I think, what's the enticement for younger folks to move in? I know there's been talk about young professionals coming into town, which always seems to be talked about, but doesn't always happen. But any thoughts on that? Kind of get that younger 20s, 30s, millennial Gen Z who, or maybe it's Stockton a part of that. Maybe, there's talk about more dorms. Can, some of those dorms be used for housing as well? I don't know.
Right. I think like tiny houses would be great for like the younger demographic. young professionals going to Atlantic Cape Community College or Stockton University. Student housing, I know when I was in college, student housing was very high.
Yep.
So, you know, if you can compare like student housing to the opportunity to actually, student housing is renting. You know, you build a tiny house community and you offer home ownership opportunities. Now what you're doing is you're giving these this young generation, these young professionals the opportunity to start off as a home owner, you know, as opposed to renting. And we know that home ownership is much more attractive, is much better, as we say, for the community, because, you know, people when they own something, they have a tendency of having the pride of ownership. So when pride of ownership becomes a factor, you know, people, they take better care of the community. They bring up the community, as opposed to, you know, sometimes the community going south.
Well, certainly, and then I'll let Councilman Marshall chime in. But that phrase, you know, nobody washes a rented car, and that's correct. And you know, obviously, we don't want to look. Folks, a lot of folks rent and respect that, not disregarding renters, but getting folks over the hump to home ownership is important. And you know, certainly one of the things to Nick's point, Nick's question, you know, somewhat related to the housing opportunities is financial literacy and teaching that. We don't teach that enough in schools. And I even saw a study recently where, particularly, frankly, among Black men and younger men of color, really are disproportionately disadvantaged with financial literacy skills, and teaching them, here's how you build up credit, here's investments you should make as you're saving up, Roth IRA, you know, your emergency fund, things of that nature. And how do you look? I wish I had that when I was growing up, right? Because nobody knows what the hell they're doing. You get a bunch of money, you spend it on pizzas and beer, and have a good time. So you know, I say that facetiously, but you know, financial literacy is a big deal, and I hopefully we can do more of that. Do you want to chime in there, Councilman Marshall?
Just off your point, financial literacy is very important. I actually majored in business with a concentration in finance, and so I had a head start. And you know, it's often said when you're in college and they like fill out that application for a free T-shirt or a water bottle, and it's really, you know, a credit card. You know, typically when a student graduates from college, not only do they have the student loan debt, but they often have the credit card debt, which affects their ability to purchase a home coming out of college in debt. But Atlantic City, and just to Nick's point, Atlantic City, his question, is a great town to have fun. And to, like you said, Mike, we have some of the best restaurants here. You know, you could take a walk. We have plenty of parks. You could take a walk on the boardwalk. So those type of attractions typically draw a younger crowd, even though we have to update some of our housing stock. Being on council, there in the last year, there are two developers that are interested in coming into Atlantic City, two buildings that have been vacant for many years, one at 1 New York Avenue and one on at Atlantic Avenue across from, I believe it's Atlantic Avenue, but they have plans to redevelop those buildings. It will be market rate rentals. However, we need to begin to start building, whether it's new building or reconstruction, redevelopment. We definitely have to do more and have to encourage development. One thing the mayor has done, he encourages development into Atlantic City. The doors are open for developers who are willing to come in and build new housing stock. So I see a lot of that coming in the future, and hopefully that will definitely draw a more of a younger crowd. And so when you do come here to party and eat in the casinos and go to the concerts and the beach concerts, hopefully you could just take an Uber home within 5 or 10 minutes.
Well, and certainly, one of the things is younger folks like to walk and go places. They don't want to necessarily drive anywhere. And I think that takes a holistic approach again of if you had a supermarket or folks that people can walk to and get their groceries and whatnot, but also transportation, whether that's, more jitney service to areas or New Jersey Transit. Certainly one of the things, dovetail a little bit from housing, but one of my big gripes and probably be a future research topic is the rail line. The rail line could be a huge boom for Atlantic City and really induce home ownership there. But, the problem is the service stinks. And while people talk about running more trains or what have you, the biggest issue we have with that rail line is it's one track. So you can only do so much. That's why it takes an hour and a half to get from AC to Philly, which is way too long. You need a second track there. Now, a second track, last time I looked at it, would be about $200 million. I think it's well worth the investment because if you could get from AC to Philly a lot quicker, let's say even an hour, 15 minutes, you'd have a lot of folks living in Atlantic City commuting to Philly or vice versa. Because I think one of the good things, even though we're in a predominantly service economy with the casinos and tourism, a lot of folks can live remotely now and work with a laptop and a cell phone and work from home. And, is that an untapped market for everybody, is getting folks to live in Atlantic City that frankly don't actually go to an office or job in Atlantic City, but maybe work in New York, but live here, or work virtually in Philadelphia and work here. I think that's an untapped, resource. Because I think I think you guys and gals saw the numbers. Atlantic City's population has been flat last 10 years. I think it went up a percent, it went down a percentage point or two. So it's really been flat or declining. And how do we get, middle-class families in, and how do we build that up? Again, to your point, Stephanie, about the tourism feel and that not attracting a whole lot of folks. I think we all got fat and happy. In the 90s, everything was going good. 2006, the best year we ever had for the casinos, and Pennsylvania casinos came online, and there you go. Now we have the threat of North Jersey casinos too, but New York City casinos coming online. And while we stopped and killed North Jersey casinos, we can't do anything about New York City casinos. And how does that affect our economy and housing opportunities here? It's a lot of all good stuff. Not all good things we should consider. That's not good, but all good things to consider. Again, folks, wrapping up in a few minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll throw this to Pastor Smith. You have the tiny homes initiative. What has changed with Atlantic City where, I think we'd all agree, even pre-casinos, you had more, more sense of community, and we've kind of lost that. And that's not necessarily nobody's did anything good or bad. Is it just because the populations in urban areas get more transient? Is it there hasn't been that sense of community? Why is it that, is it just the segregation like I talked about, where you have rich folks, poor folks, middle class folks, kind of in different camps? Why is it that sense of community that maybe we had years ago isn't as prevalent and now?
I think one of the reasons might be because a lot of people who were like homegrown have left. You know what I'm saying? So when people who are homegrown end up leaving, I think that takes away from that sense of community, or that community that was built. And some people leave and they never come back. You know what I'm saying? And then you have other groups that matriculate in. Some people may come back, but now that community that you built is no longer there. And if you don't know the new community, it just makes it that much more of a challenge to build again, that sense of community and togetherness.
Yeah, to your point, and I'll kick it over to Councilman Marshall. A lot of folks, everybody talks, and I guess I'm guilty of it too, right? I'm born and raised, live lifelong resident Galloway, but I feel like I'm an Atlantic City person, but I don't live there. And I chose to live in Galloway. I love Galloway, so that's why I chose to live here. But look, I get the point of folks go and leave and don't come back. And how do we get them back?
I was born and raised in Atlantic City, went through public schools, graduated Atlantic City High School in 91. And a lot of my friends who also went away to school, if they did come back, they did not purchase homes in Atlantic City. Part of the reason, because I asked all the time, part of the reason is Atlantic City, you can't have a basement. And then there's not much land in city life. So that's something they have to get used to. And then final is updating the housing stock. You know, a lot of people, Atlantic City is an old city. And so the housing stock shows that. And that's one of the problems with a lot of urban cities. They were your original cities, you know, 100 so years ago. Housing was built. And what happened? You begin to move out of the city, transportation becomes better, and you move out, and then there's new housing stock. And then, you know, then folks begin to migrate more and more out of cities and to into new homes. And that's something that has happened, and that's the issue around a lot of cities, and that's the issue here in Atlantic City. And one thing that we have to do, and which Atlantic City did do 30 years ago under Mayor Whalen at the time, in Ushery, and then it was Whalen, is where they rebuilt the inlet where I live. And they were able to, it was a program that Welland did, that you could get a house for a house, you know, and it was blocks of land where you had just a couple homes here and there, and they tore those homes down and redeveloped the entire neighborhood. Well, that was, you know, that was in the early 90s. It was something that started in the late 80s and ended up in the early 90s. And we just have to look back, you know, look into more of those programs so that we could develop. Because I know plenty of people who would love to live in Atlantic City if they could purchase something with just, you know, a newer home, opposed to a home that is 50, 60 years old, and they have to do a lot of work. So I think that would definitely encourage people to come back.
Agreed 100%. And probably one of the things to probably end on before we have closing comments is, and it's one thing we have to talk about, right? I mean, clearly the threat of climate change and sea level rise, and certainly that's one factor we all three of us and everybody watching is going to have to deal with, because some areas that were formerly habitable may not be in 30 or 40 years. And that's going to be a problem. And, you know, everybody wants to live right on the beach and have, you know, luxury housing, but you know, if there's going to be, if the Hurricane Sandys are going to be more prevalent, you know, we're going to have a problem with that. And how do we brace for that? Do we have to make some of these, to your point, no basements anymore, Stephanie, you know, do you have to make homes a little higher? Does that affect seniors particularly, who maybe aren't as nimble as they once were to get up steps or have ramps or things like that? So it's just something we should think about, not poo-pooing development, but certainly we have to make it sustainable housing, because to your point, you know, it shouldn't be another 30 years till we have new housing stock. And, you know, certainly we don't want to gentrify the whole city, for God's sakes, and push people out. But, you know, just having, you know, if you have young children, presumably you want to live in a nice house. You want to live in a nice tiny home, like the pastor was saying. You know, you don't want to be in an 100-year-old house. It's not like Bordentown, right, where it's a historically, or Mill Hill and Trent, these historic neighborhoods, 100-year homes, that they're quaint. That's the point of that. You know, some of those neighborhoods it works good, but a lot of times, like, I don't want to live in a friggin' 100-year-old house. I want to live in a new house with steel appliances and a good washer and a good sewer system and stuff like that. So I guess I'll end it on this. Certainly appreciate everybody watching, but, you know, final, floor for everybody. You know, if you had a magic wand, and let's say there's one thing, even if it's a big thing or a small thing, that you could do, or just if money were no option, or you know, Aladdin gave you 3 wishes and you could change a thing or two, or put some policies in place to help with housing and the middle class, what would it be? Easy questions.
It would be, if cities were allowed, if developers purchased land and did not build on that land in a period of time, to be able to take the land back, of course, pay them for what the land is worth, and hand it over to another developer to build. Another issue, we have developers who have purchased land in Atlantic City, and they're holding the land and they are not willing to sell. And even up near Ocean Casino, when Revel was built and they tore down a lot of the affordable homes up there, a lot of those folks moved out. Well, a lot of that land was then sold to Revel, and so there's these little lots, so not even entire city blocks in an inlet. and you have about 5 or 6 owners up there and no one is willing to sell. So that caused a problem. And folks say all the time, well, why can't you just build something right there? Well, technically by law, you can't just take someone's land. As long as they pay their taxes on their land and cut the grass, the property could stay vacant for 30, 40, and 50 years. And that's one of the issues in Atlantic City. So if I had some type of magic wand, it would definitely be to pay people for what their land is worth, and rebuild and find a developer and a bank who's willing to finance it, because sometimes that becomes another issue as well, and to redevelop.
Yeah, you make a great point about land speculators and people sitting on the land, and it's hindering development. No question. What about you, Pastor Smith?
If I had a magic wand, and you said
to induce housing or bring folks to Atlantic City, what would it be? I can go first if you'd like, to give you some time. But
no, what I thought about was like zoning laws. Like I would change a lot of the zoning laws, because like a lot of the zoning laws and rules, like they prohibit development. You know what I'm saying? And I've talked to quite a bit of people in regards to their interest in developing tiny houses. But a question that often comes up is, the zoning for today. And, you can get around zoning with a variance. But if things were like kind of change in anticipation for certain trends and changes that are going on like countrywide, then it would make things a lot more easier for people who are trying to do good.
yeah, and I think, and I said it kind of jokingly about a magic wand, but I think that the points that you two are making, are tangible things that we should look at. And I know somebody in the chat had the idea of do you give developers 2 years to work on land? And we don't want to rush stuff, but the idea of the inlet is a beautiful part of town. Stephanie lives there. I mean, God, that's a great spot to live in and do business in. Certainly for me, and it's tangible as well. But look, I think we should go the route of Philadelphia. 10-year housing abatement for any new residents. Help folks in the city who live there with either give them money for down payments, or help them out with the mortgage subsidy, where if the going rate for a mortgage is 7%, but you do a half a penny increase on casino taxes, and you could get a mortgage in the city for 3.5. Not as great as it was a couple of years ago during the pandemic, but still pretty good. And that would be real tangible savings monthly for folks to build equity. If you could take a couple $100 off somebody's mortgage payment every month, that would be real tight. Because the goal is you want to show that it's cheaper to own than to rent. The issue is sometimes it's not always the case, or folks don't have the money for a down payment, which is an issue. And the other thing I would say too, the magic wand thing, and we busting chops on both sides on this, is the supermarket. You gotta, you can't just be the Save-A-Lot in Renaissance Plaza. Trader Joe's, ShopRite, Acme,
Mazio's.
as BF Mazio's. We're keeping this nonpartisan. Vince would do it good, and Produce Junction, whatever. You need a place that people can walk and get quality stuff, and that food desert. Atlantic City is a food desert. So Stephanie, Pastor Smith, a lot of really great discussion, had a lot of fun, learned a hell of a lot more at the end than I did the beginning, because you two educated me on a lot of stuff. Hopefully you at home or mobily watching enjoyed this too. And we want to take all this info, put it in a report to release soon, hopefully continue the conversation going. And again, the purpose of South Jersey Forward is not just to talk about these, to actually implement it and give tangible solutions, actually work with policy makers to implement these things. And I think now we already have some great ideas, either at a city level and a state level, to get some proposals to push and hopefully get them passed. So with that, I appreciate everybody watching. Stephanie and Pastor Smith, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see everybody at the next one. So thanks, everybody.